So the first session was really focused on more about the sort of, what is co-design and some examples of its application. I think the request this time was to talk more about the actual sort of practical tools and techniques associated with doing co-design. So I'll just run through some of those things and then maybe just have more of a sort of open discussion at the end, and would also be really interested in examples, which I'm sure you all have from your own practices and organisations as well. Because this is definitely, something that, whilst it's been around, I think it's something that we still need to get better at, and we're all still learning about it as we go. So this was the basic model that I interested just around the sort of problem solving approach last time. And I'm going to talk through each of these steps. So this is the double diamond, which is originally from the Design Council in the UK, but it's used quite a lot these days. And basically it's got a focus on trying to take you through engaging people in not only coming up with ideas and solutions, but really and importantly, framing the problem. Often, I remember when I joined the sort of more the engineering infrastructure space, people said people love that second diamond. Like they are very quick to say, let's build something here. Let's, I've heard of this amazing technology, let's do this. But there's often not a lot of time spent on actually understanding the problem. Are we solving the right problem? Do we really understand what the problem is? Sometimes, alternatively, often in the community or not-for-profit space, there's a strong focus on the problem. And then often there's not enough time, or there's a lot of nervousness to sort of try different solutions. So I'd certainly be interested in any of your observations on that as well. But before even, I think, going into those steps, this is the piece that's often missed. And I'm sure that, sometimes there's skepticism around co-design. Is it really just another name for traditional community consultation activities? And I think where that piece is sometimes missing is whether or not the effort has been put into establishing the foundations first. And establishing those foundations is really about setting up an environment where all of these things in those circles can genuinely work together. And that includes having a fair engagement model around that. So how are people remunerated for their time? How are people valued for their contributions? Is that actually formalized and really clear and transparent to them from the beginning? Then what are the principles that really underpin the way that we work together? How do we address power dynamics that we know will exist if you take people through a process where you haven't actually thought about how those power dynamics are likely to play out? The third part is looking at who are the key funders and experts that you want to bring into this process. So do you have sort of, go, no-go criteria set up for all the conditions for actually how you want people to work with you? There were certainly some times in YLab where we would start a project and our associates would say, actually, we don't feel comfortable with this arrangement. And we would have to have a very sometimes awkward conversation with the funder about, if we were going to continue this project, we had to address these sort of foundational elements so that everyone felt comfortable in the process. In addition, who are some of the experts that you might need to bring in? So there is still, space for the sort of subject matter expertise, the people who understand how these institutions work, and how are they going to work collaboratively in this environment. And then the final part is actually the sort of team capability. So does the team have the skills and the mindset to work in this way where lived experience is essentially, valued on an equal footing with more traditional domains of knowledge. So that's just the foundations that I would sort of highly recommend need to be focused on and a lot of effort put into rather than jumping straight into the design process. So moving on, this is sort of that first part of the diagram. The reason this is a diamond is because the idea is that you start off very divergent, very open with your thinking, and then the second half of the problem stage is where you start to go convergent. So really this space is where you bring people together to really just understand the problem without any constraints, without having to try to jump to any conclusions. So a lot of questioning our own assumptions, what kind of biases or other things are we bringing into our framing of this problem in the first place? And I've just listed some different sort of techniques and things that you can draw on for this. The first one is sort of system or actor mapping. And this is something that was really interesting doing with different groups. You would be working in a community with young people and you get them to draw their experience of the system around them. So we usually try and place the person who's at the center of this program or system at the center, and what are all of the pieces around them that are influencing them. And then we do the same with some of the more institutional actors in that space. And often the way that they would view that system, when you overlay them, they look quite different. And so that in and of itself was sort of an interesting thing to be able to explore with people. Often it meant that, we were missing out on, when thinking about a program or a service, we were missing out on key, really, influential, informal actors within that community who, were central to someone else's system map of that same sort of area. And so it just helped to fill some of those gaps. The second one is observation. And that's particularly around, say you're looking at how people engage in transport or something that's sort of a public facing service. And so actually just seeing, everything from when they walk into a building, do they look a bit lost? Do they look a bit sort of confused and uncomfortable? And really trying to think to that really granular level of someone's experience in interacting with a program or service and noting those observations and any patterns. The third one is interviews, which are the sort of semi-structured informal interviews, particularly, having people who were relatable doing those interviews was particularly important. The fourth one is diary studies. So you can actually, pay people to keep a journal or a diary of their experience day to day and to share what they feel comfortable. This can be done using videos or photos or words, whatever format is most comfortable to people. And from that, you can really sort of gain some interesting insights into someone's experience or world. The next one is empathy mapping, and I've got an example of an empathy map there on the slide. And this is really where, from a user's perspective or the sort of person that you're designing for, really understanding what is it that they're saying about a problem, what is it that they're actually doing about a problem, what are they potentially thinking about the problem, but maybe don't feel comfortable saying, and actually can you tease some of those things out, or is there some inference you can draw, but also what do they actually feel? So often when we do engagement activities, we focus a lot on the do and the says, and not so much the thinking and feeling side of it. So trying to understand that and build really strong empathy with someone's experience. And then the final one is really an affinity diagram or mind map. And that's that just sort of free association of how things are connected around a particular issue or problem. And that's just a few examples. There's, you can even just go online and you'll find so many different techniques and tools. These are some which I quite like to use. So then the next part is moving into the definition of the problem. And this is that convergent piece. So you've got all of these insights, you've got all of this data, all of these experiences sort of collected. How do you actually define that into a problem? One way is to create a problem tree where you sort of break down an overarching problem into a series of smaller problems. Another way is personas. So creating almost sort of profiles of people and what are some of their specific pain points or things, aspirations that they're looking for in relation to that problem. And then one which I use quite a lot is the how might we questions. And there's an example there. This is from the design school, D school at Stanford University. And so they've got an example here where they say, one of the insights, if you're running an ice cream business, for example, is that licking someone else's ice cream cone is more tender than a hug. So that's an insight that they would have gained from that first part. And then it's what are the sort of design questions or the problem sort of statements essentially that you can draw from that. And so they've got some where you focus on really emphasizing the good that you got from that insight. So how might we make the tandem of ice cream cones? Focusing on those emotions, say from that empathy map. So how might we make the I'm sorry ice cream experience? And then through to other things like questioning an assumption behind all of that. How might we share ice cream without a cone or a cup? And so you can come up with a long series of these how might we questions. And then as a group sort of zone in on which are maybe the top 3 to 5 that really resonate with people. And that then becomes essentially the focus for when you move into the solution part of the double diamond. And the important thing throughout all of this is back to that foundational piece around having everyone really sort of come together and, how do you build consensus around the framing of the problem, around the aspect or the element of the problem that you're going to focus on. So the next piece is ideation, which is really just coming up with ideas. So some different sort of techniques and tools here. Things like basically just coming up with a wish list. The other one is the reverse of that. So coming up with how would you make this problem even worse? And it can be terrifying sometimes when you do that and you realize that actually some of those things have been implemented or tried. But that just gets, when you get a bit stuck, that can be a useful one to do. The next one is sort of brainstorming, but using different visual or physical prompts. So that can involve, getting people to go for a walk to come up with ideas first. You can use photos to help sort of prompt thinking or for inspiration. Other things like trend cards, which might have, this is a trend that we have seen and we expect it to continue in the next 20 years. What might that mean? A key thing here is that a lot of the research has found that people actually come up with their best ideas first by thinking solo. So often, when we want to come up with ideas, we bring a whole group of people together and we ask everyone to brainstorm at the same time. However, having that first period where people kind of get to be in their own head to come up with as many ideas with a focus on really quantity over quality to start with is important. I think some of the things that contribute to sort of issues with group brainstorming is, it can lead to a group think. The group sort of suggests a particular direction and everyone sort of follows. It can also sometimes, obviously, favor extroverted personalities over more introverted personalities and those sorts of things. The next one is a sort of round robin or collaborative sketching. So this can be where you have a piece of paper, you divide it into 3. You might have a group of 5. Each person starts off with their idea, 3 ideas on that piece of paper, and then you move it to the next person and they might have 3 minutes to add to that idea or ask questions. And then you pass it around until you get it back and you see what that combined idea set sort of looks like. The next one is a series of questions around what if. So this could be asking, it's really trying to tease out scenarios like removing a constraint. So what if you had no budget restrictions? What would you do? You can also think about different sorts of, and this is really useful if you have people who are just really, a bit struggling to sort of get creative or come up with different things, this activity is really helpful in trying to open up that thinking. You can have, what if you were, Richard Branson? You can have those sorts of questions as well. What would your decision be? Or what kind of idea might you come up with? So you can use that to really take people on a more divergent series of questioning if you feel like the line of ideas you're getting is a little bit, kind of similar to the status quo. The last one is around crowdsourcing. And this is something that you can do quite easily digitally or in person. So, some work that we were doing in Brimbank for a while, we used to just have a board put up in the community hub in the library where we just have a different sort of design question, like one of those how might we questions every week, and just leave it there for people to add their ideas to over the week. And that worked really well in that environment. You can also do it online. So, actually, I think City of Melbourne has done this with some of their ideas around sort of the future of Melbourne and that sort of thing, just trying to get as many ideas as you can. And then finally, this one is around how do you actually prototype or test the solution. And this step is actually what is quite different potentially to previous and more traditional approaches to planning, where you spend heaps of time planning and then you have a massive rollout and then you do the evaluation and you see what works and what didn't. The idea with this is it's quite a fast process. So you have those ideas, you might pick 5 that you say we're actually going to prototype or test them over the next month. And we're not going to invest heaps of money in them. It's not going to be a huge rollout, but we're just going to test some of those features with the people who we're actually designing for. And so this can involve developing things like storyboards that you talk people through, role playing. You can set up sort of a cardboard, cutouts of your potential environment or the service experience. You can use Lego or dioramas, and you can also have pop-ups. So whether it's, you just want to test a particular new service, but you don't know whether you want to invest in it, or a particular new program, and you just have a mini version of it without all of the infrastructure, but just to test some of the ideas behind the concept. And this whole process, it can really be done, it can be a 6 to 18 month process, or it's something that you can do in 3 months really, really quickly with a group. So it's quite flexible, and the idea is that it's very, very iterative. So you constantly sort of go back and check your understanding of the problem, your framing of the problem, because it's definitely not meant to be a linear process. And you just keep sort of contributing to what you learn as a group as you go through it. The final thing I just wanted to mention is obviously this year we've had to shift a lot to doing all of this digitally in a virtual environment. And here is just a few sort of things like Mural and Miro, which are essentially sort of online whiteboards. So when you need to do a workshop type situation, we found them really useful. If you have a larger budget, you can actually do some sort of virtual testing of different scenarios or different design features. Even just using, depending on what platforms you use, different social media platforms to get that kind of day-to-day engagement going. And then Mentimeter is another sort of online. You can use it for questioning and polls and surveys, either sort of live, or you can just send people a code to fill out. But the idea is really that all of these activities and tools which we've just sort of gone through, all of them can be converted to an online experience. And it's just, how do you engage people and make sure that it is a 5 to 10 minute commitment, rather than a sort of 2-hour workshop, because people get a bit fatigued. At least that's been our experience from constant, Zoom calls or Teams meetings.
But I agree, those tools, anything you can do that's a little bit surprising, a little bit cute, it just helps to give people a feeling that they're part of an experience, like they're getting something back just by participating.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's just sort of an overview of, really the process, some of the tools and techniques you can use. And as I mentioned, I might just open it back up to sort of questions, discussions. Would just be really interested in where you've tried different aspects of this and what has worked and not worked as well.
Sure. Does anyone have any questions or reflections? One thing that struck me early in your presentation, Sarah, thank you for that. It was really, you really get to the crux of it. I like that you don't talk around it. You're getting straight into the nuts and bolts. You were in the double diamond. There's the problem, and really spending time considering what that's about and where is the root cause of that, as opposed to getting too excited about the solution phase. I think that even as in our collective professions, we're in sort of helping professions, maybe we tend to have a personality type that's a little bit the fixer, that wants to fix things, that wants to, we can't help ourselves, where we see something that could be better and we want to make it better immediately. So I think it's something for us to be really mindful of in our own personal practice, to give people the space to explore issues themselves, and not propose solutions. Allow people who are experiencing scenarios to understand it fully themselves and help us to understand it more fully, and to build toward a solution together. It's something I have to always hold back. I'm always like, oh, and we could do this. Oh, yeah, and oh, what if we did that? And I have to be like, no, stop it.
it's that's how we've been trained, though, isn't it? It's a lot to break. So yeah, it's a really interesting reflection.
Sarah, I really like the whole idea of prototyping. I think, often we sort of get stuck delivering something that, we know that is not quite working. And I think the idea of, just shifting our thinking a little bit around prototyping and trying a few different ways, and also having that discussion with our funders as well, in terms, well, this is not quite working. We need to make sure it's actually working for the people that we're working for. So I really like the concept of prototyping myself, to be quite honest, and and having that discussion with some of the funders, and yeah, so I just want to sort of talk a little bit more about that, I guess.
And sometimes our solution is not a solution for everyone.
Yeah,
exactly. And that was something, I think at first we were very nervous about taking that kind of, we're going to essentially have 5 different prototypes, and we're going to test them, and then we'll roll out, the ones that kind of work at whatever scale seems relevant. And it's obviously with funding submissions, you feel like you have to be so specific about everything. And we were kind of nervous about doing that at first. But actually, we never really had any pushback when we did put that approach. We would have to understand some of their metrics, or they might still want to say that, you've engaged with 100 people over a particular time frame who fall into a particular demographic, those sorts of things. But we found that we were able to have a discussion about being quite flexible about what that, what that engagement looked like, and being able to say, we'll run this process, we'll probably come up with essentially 5 experiments, and then we want to test these things and see what works and ramp up the pieces that work and what doesn't work. And we never really I don't think we ever really had any pushback from funders, which we weren't expecting. We thought it was going to be much harder.
It
And
makes
so-
a lot of sense, really, the sort of testing a few different approaches, because not everything works with everybody. So
Mm.
having multiple approaches is probably more I guess, intuitive in terms of how community probably would like us to respond.
We've actually tested those approaches with our resident meetings for North Melbourne and Flemington. I mean, they first started out by having very kind of specific cultural groups that we met with. I guess off the back of the Wednesday meetings, we'd have a topical meetings if people were interested in those topics. And now we've kind of, I guess, moved into a space where the residents have told us that estate by estate meetings is probably there. So one for North Melbourne, one for Flemington. So we did go through that process of testing what worked and having that fluidity, that fluid approach, I guess. But on a reflection towards the end of the presentation, thank you so much, Sarah. I love a good Mentimeter. It's a good icebreaker. And I don't know, in this digital world, you know, that we're in now, at the beginning of a meeting, it's always awkward for that first 5 minutes and you're waiting for people to come in and, you know, yeah, I like that approach. So I'd like to use those kind of icebreakers a little bit more.
Yeah. Even just playing music, I found
Yeah.
made a
Yes.
big difference, you know, while people are waiting or thinking.
Yeah, it's a bit like, you know, the way you would consider having a party or, you know, an in-person event. You know, you put all that thought into, okay, there's going to be catering and people are going to come in and I'm going to be at the door welcoming, and like we don't put probably, well, when we're learning how to do it to become online hosts in the same fashion, it's taking a bit of practice.
Definitely.
Beth, I think you had something to say and I just kept cutting over you.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say, like, my experience with co-design, which I did a bit in a previous life, was trying to talk to funders in particular, or like higher up in management, about the idea of failing, because the whole thing with the prototyping is that like you're kind of planning for things not to work. And I think two parts to that. One, which is with co-design, is that it usually costs a bit more money and it usually takes a bit more time, and trying to get, you know, like, oh, if it's kind of working already, why do we need to change it? But it's kind of like, well, it could work better or it might not be doing exactly what we want. And I think there's sometimes a hesitation in kind of NGO kind of spaces where, like, if it's not really broken, we don't want to push our funders too much to do new things because it's so precarious that, like, we're kind of like, well, we don't want to say we're going to do these things and it's going to take more time than our normal process and it's going to maybe cost a bit more money, and also there's like a 95% chance that it's not going to work. So and that's the whole thing. Like, when it does work, it's so great and can have these really positive changes. But I think I was just kind of more a comment, I guess, saying it's great to hear that it's kind of becoming a bit more accepted in sort of bigger organizations and departments, that they're kind of recognizing these sort of practices. But I guess just like getting some reflection on how do you talk about failing in kind of a really positive way, because I think it's really important and innovation is all about that. But when funding is so tight, it's hard to be able to say, yeah, give us money so we can fail, but we'll learn from it and we'll fail better next time.
Yeah, it's definitely, no one likes to fund failure, right? It's a real challenge. I think one of the things that was really important, you know, going back to that establishing the foundations piece, because essentially what we were able to say to funders is we're going to have these 5 experiments. Some might work better than others. Hopefully, you know, some of them are successes, and we did kind of hope on, you know, at least one of them sort of working. But also, at the very, very worst case, even if all 5 fail, there's this group of people who we've worked with, we've recruited, we've provided employment opportunities, we've upskilled the sector more generally. And so there were these other benefits actually about that foundational piece, which people were also willing to pay for. And so they were sort of paying for both. They were paying for the model, which had benefits in and of itself that they were trying to achieve. And then there was also this added, and we may hopefully come up with some great solutions that you can roll out as a result of this. And, in addition, part of that establishing the foundations piece is we would say that, we were sort of very upfront about this is about systems change for us. And so that system about that piece around, if it's not broken, don't fix it. We sort of went in saying, it is broken and we need to, think about systems change. And so that was really talking about some of those sort of conditions of funders that we'd work with. We had to be on the same page in terms of that as a starting point, or they wouldn't have funded us in the first place.
Loretta's popped a question in the chat asking if there's any other advice, Sarah, you might give, or maybe other people have had good experiences with persuading funders to embark on a co-design experience that maybe will take more time and more money. Any hot tips on what might get it over the line?
I think definitely being able to show that you have a really solid model underpinning people's engagement in it is important, and that there is that in and of itself is also a sort of evaluation process, which funders often feel like they don't get enough data or evaluation back from different programs. So we were able to provide really, really great, regardless of how the project went, we were able to provide really good evaluation information as a result of that. But the other thing was we really flipped our whole business model. So, the long-term time and investment, that was something which we sort of invested in, and it would sort of get topped up through different projects. But we could actually do these short-term, 1 month, 3 month co-design pieces because we'd already invested in the relationships, the training of our associates. We already had that piece sort of there. And yes, we could top it up with different funders as more opportunities came along. But we had sort of framed our whole model around that long-term investment and approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think also what I'm hearing would be that to boost the angle on capacity building, that in participating in this design process, that you're building the capacity of the participants to problem solve, to work in groups, to have faith in the system, to be excited for the next thing, and to take ownership of the outcomes and solutions. That building ownership, I would imagine, would be an important sort of softer outcome. Mark's just popped into the chat that he's done some great work with CoHealth and used Taxi. Oh, what's Taxi?
The Centre for, now you'll know this, Sarah.
Social
Australian
Innovation.
Centre for Social Innovation. Yeah, they were actually one of our partners. So they were sort of the grown-up version of YLab. They're excellent.
I think there's something to be said for not using grown-ups. I'm not a big fan of using the big consultancy groups. Taxi did do great work there. Just quickly on that, and as a funder, I can probably give you a few insights. So we spent a lot of time predominantly around summer. If you may recall, South Sudanese community was getting vilified quite significantly in media for a range of youth crime type activity the last 3 or 4 years. It's kind of gone off the last couple of years, but for probably 4 years there, you can almost set your clock by sort of January, hysteria around crime-related activity. What we wanted to do, and we did with CoHealth, was try and change the narrative and not always be responding to the crisis stuff, but working with community to really get their ideas forward. And so we basically made an undertaking to community that they could work with Taxi. They use peer educators, so South Sudanese peer educators were a big part of the initiative, to come up with ideas. We didn't guarantee that we would fund them. We also said that doesn't need to be DHS specific. If you've got good ideas, we'll go around and hunt around. So I think of those projects, we've funded about 3 of 5. And we've just done it slowly, and we continue to look for those opportunities to knock on the door. So from my perspective, I'm not every funder, but we're really open to innovative approaches that are a bit different. I was having a conversation with Rebecca, the CEO here of Wombat, and yesterday she was talking about the unprecedented demand on housing establishment funds, and that there's got to be a better way. And I think, you know, if you feel there's your capacity to do it, pitch some ideas to us. We're really open to it. I am hopeful that we will start to have some grants that we can kind of really target towards the estate. Obviously, anything you can do in partnership with a number of residents would really be a good thing. We don't want to do 2, we want to do with. But yeah, we're really open to that. That's the whole intent of this group that we're part of now, is to think differently. We won't always succeed. We won't always have budget. It's pretty tight at the moment. But you know, invest some time and effort into it. It won't be wasted.
Is there anything else for Sarah? Thank you so much, Sarah. That was awesome, really inspiring, and reminds us to yeah, push things a little bit. And we all know this is the right way to do things. So we just got to stick with it, stick with our guns. So thank you very much. Please do stick around and hear some more from other agencies. Loretta,
can I stop recording?
Yeah.
Thanks.